Russia destroys Ukraine's dangerous trap. How can the Ukrainian army strike back? At 5:15 a.m. on September 8, 2025, the war on Ukraine's eastern front erupted. Russia launched an attack of shocking scale into Ukrainian territory. 320 drones, 70 tanks, 30 mine-clearing vehicles, and 1,200 elite troops crossed the Donetsk-Luhansk border in a massive pincer attack. For Moscow, it was supposed to be the perfect operation: fast, overwhelming, unstoppable. The roar of engines and swarms of drones darkened the morning sky, signaling what many believed would be the annihilation of Ukraine. What they did not know was that Ukraine was no longer the country it had been in the early days of the war. Under the leadership of General Alexander Syrsky, the defenders were preparing for something Russia never expected. What followed was not just a military clash, but a brutal lesson in modern warfare, turning Russia's confidence into disaster. What will the Ukrainian army do to stop this devastating attack by the Russian army? What will Russia face when the Ukrainian army counterattacks? Let's find out. At 5:15 a.m. on September 8, 2025, the silence along the Donetsk-Luhansk frontier was shattered. The first wave came from above. 320 Russian drones rising like a dark swarm against the breaking dawn. Their orders were ruthless and precise. 120 drones targeted Ukraine's air defense systems, attempting to blind radars and silence missile batteries. Another 100 drones carried incendiary payloads meant to ignite fuel depots. The remaining 100 kamikaze drones were armed with high explosive charges, designed to rip open ammunition bunkers in a single strike. Each explosion was calculated to cripple Ukraine's ability to fight. Then the ground shook. 30 armored mine-clearing vehicles rolled forward, their metal rollers smashing the soil with enough force to detonate any hidden charges. Behind them thundered a spearhead of 70 Russian tanks, each weighing nearly 50 tons, together forming more than 3,500 tons of armored steel. Their cannons, capable of firing rounds at 5,400 feet per second, were positioned to obliterate anything in their path. Behind this wall of armor marched 1,200 elite Russian soldiers, the equivalent of nearly a full brigade, carrying modern rifles, grenade launchers, and anti-tank missiles. Moving in perfect formation, they advanced with grim confidence, believing the day's battle would end with Ukraine crushed. The spectacle was staggering. In just one morning, Russia had hurled over $1.2 billion worth of war machines and firepower across a single sector of the front. The weight of iron, the buzz of drones, and the grinding of tank treads combined into a deafening roar that carried for miles. For civilians still caught in the villages nearby, the ground itself seemed to quake as if the earth was caving under the pressure of war. From Moscow's perspective, this was the flawless plan: overwhelm the sky, tear open the ground, and drive a steel wedge through Ukraine's defenses. The double pincer maneuver looked unstoppable, engineered to suffocate Ukrainian troops before they could react. Yet hidden beyond the smoke and thunder, Ukraine had prepared something else, something Russia never expected. If you were a Ukrainian commander in this situation, facing 70 tanks and more than 300 Russian drones at once, would you strike back immediately or wait patiently for the perfect moment? Share your thoughts in the comments below. As the Russian armored column pushed deeper into Ukrainian soil, Ukraine's commanders prepared their counterstroke. Leading the defense was General Alexander Syrsky, a battle-hardened strategist who had faced Russia's brutal assaults for years. Instead of rushing to meet the invaders head-on, Syrsky ordered his men to wait. His gamble was simple but deadly: allow the Russians to push forward, funnel them into a killing zone, and then detonate a massive minefield that would tear their spearhead apart in seconds. Beneath the fields outside Bakhmut, Ukraine had secretly planted 60 high-yield anti-tank mines, each with a blast radius powerful enough to rip apart a 50-ton tank. Unlike traditional traps, these mines were wired together by a manual trigger. A single pull of a detonator cord could unleash an inferno across hundreds of yards. Ukrainian soldiers waited in silence, their fingers on the line, eyes fixed on the advancing steel. At 5:42 a.m., the Russian lead vehicles entered the kill zone. Ukrainian troops prepared to strike. But then, disaster struck. One of the 30 Russian mine-clearing tanks, weighing more than 45 tons, rolled directly over the central charges. The crushing weight triggered the underground explosives prematurely. In an instant, the ground erupted. Fireballs tore skyward, and the shockwaves shattered windows miles away. The explosions destroyed 14 Russian vehicles, but also blew apart Ukraine's carefully timed ambush. What was meant to annihilate the entire Russian column had been spent too early. The trap, meticulously prepared for weeks, had collapsed in less than 10 seconds. For a moment, panic rippled through the Ukrainian lines. Soldiers feared the tide had turned, that the Russian spearhead would now surge through the breach and crush everything in its path. But General Syrski did not flinch. The minefield may have misfired, but the battle was far from lost. Hold the line. Let them think we are finished. Then we strike where they least expect it. General Alexander Syrski. Be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and share your thoughts. Now let's see what happens next when the Ukraine trap is destroyed. The minefield trap may have detonated too soon, but General Syrski refused to concede momentum. Within minutes of the failed blast, he unleashed Ukraine's hidden weapon. A swarm of 200 specialized drones, each carrying reinforced nets designed to entangle Russian UAVs mid-flight. As they lifted into the morning sky, the battlefield transformed into a chaotic aerial hunt. The Russians countered fiercely. Of the original 320 drones they had deployed, more than 180 were still operational, sweeping over Ukrainian positions like a storm of hornets. Russian operators pushed them forward with desperation, attempting to blind radars, silence artillery, and break the defensive line. The clash became a deadly ballet of steel and fire. The Ukrainian drone nets struck first. Within minutes, they ensnared over 70 Russian UAVs, dragging them down like birds caught in invisible webs. Meanwhile, ground-based batteries roared to life. Rows of 6-barrel Gatling guns spun at blistering speeds of 6,000 rounds per minute, spitting tracers into the heavens. The sky lit up with streaks of orange fire as wave after wave of Russian drones were shredded mid-air, but Russia fought back with ruthless determination. 3 drones slipped through, smashing into a Ukrainian forward base. The explosions wounded 5 soldiers and set supply trucks ablaze. Smoke billowed upward, a reminder that even small breaches could inflict painful losses. Ukraine answered with overwhelming force. Syrski ordered the release of 250 kamikaze drones and 100 bomb-dropping UAVs, each programmed to dive onto Russian armor. The effect was devastating. In the first strike alone, 27 Russian tanks were hit, their turrets blown apart like tin cans. Infantry formations scattered in panic as explosions ripped through their lines, killing and maiming hundreds within minutes. The resistance was brutal. Russian soldiers, trapped under fire, fired wildly into the sky, wasting ammunition in a frenzy of fear. Others clung to their burning vehicles, refusing to retreat, even as Ukrainian armor from both forest flanks opened fire with heavy shells. The battlefield shook with continuous detonations. By 6:10 a.m., nearly 40% of Russia's frontline armor had been obliterated. What had begun as a confident assault was collapsing into desperation. Ukraine's counterstrike, born from chaos, was now carving Russia's offensive to pieces. Yet Syrski knew the fight was far from over. The Russians, though battered, would resist to the last round. The next phase of battle would be the most decisive. Next came the appearance of the Ukrainian tank column, which completely collapsed the Russian attack. As the drone war raged overhead, the ground battle erupted into its deadliest phase. From the cover of 2 dense forests flanking the battlefield, Ukraine unleashed its armored spearheads. Dozens of T-64 and T-72 tanks, upgraded with modern optics and NATO-supplied munitions, rolled out in formation. Their guns roared almost simultaneously, spitting high-velocity shells at Russian armor trapped in the open. The effect was devastating. In the first 7 minutes of shelling, at least 19 Russian tanks were reduced to burning wrecks, their ammunition cooking off in catastrophic fireballs. Turrets weighing nearly 15 tons were blown clear into the air, landing hundreds of feet away. Survivors described the battlefield as a sea of black smoke pillars, each marking the grave of an armored giant. Russia's response was ferocious but desperate. Crews attempted to pivot their tanks toward the forests, firing blindly into the tree lines. Over 500 rounds of tank and artillery fire were expended in just 15 minutes, but with little effect. Ukrainian tanks, firing from covered positions, simply shifted and returned fire with surgical precision. The Russian infantry, once confident, now faced annihilation. Caught in the crossfire, hundreds of soldiers scattered into ditches, barns, and roadside craters. Some tried to regroup and launch counterattacks with portable anti-tank missiles, managing to destroy 2 Ukrainian vehicles. But every attempt was met with withering suppressive fire from Ukrainian machine gun squads and armored personnel carriers advancing behind the tanks. By 6:35 a.m., the battlefield had collapsed into chaos. Out of the original 70 Russian tanks, fewer than 25 remained operational, many damaged and running low on fuel. Infantry losses were staggering. Estimates placed over 400 Russian soldiers killed or incapacitated in less than an hour. What Moscow had envisioned as a clean breakthrough had devolved into a nightmare of burning steel and scattered men. Still, pockets of resistance clung to survival. Isolated Russian squads dug into ruined farmhouses and tree lines, firing wildly at drones overhead and Ukrainian armor closing in. They fought with a kind of suicidal defiance, determined to bleed Ukraine for every inch of ground. But Syrski's plan was not finished. Even as Russian lines disintegrated, he prepared the final blow, one that would hunt down the remnants and erase the assault completely. By 6:50 a.m., the Russian assault had disintegrated into fragments. What began as a steel juggernaut was now a scattered burning graveyard stretching across the Donetsk steppe. Yet General Syrsky knew the fight wasn't over. To end it decisively, Ukraine unleashed its most precise weapon, UAVs armed with cameras and strike charges. Dozens of reconnaissance drones fanned out across the battlefield, each transmitting live feeds of every tree line, farmhouse, and crater. The images were chilling. Groups of Russian soldiers, once part of the 1,200-man spearhead, now huddled in pockets of fewer than a dozen, trying to escape the slaughter. Many carried wounded comrades. Others clutched empty rifles, their ammunition long spent. The drones dove in. Kamikaze UAVs plunged into trenches and barns where Russian troops hid, detonating with surgical precision. In less than 20 minutes, at least 150 soldiers were eliminated by drone strikes alone. Survivors, overwhelmed, began to panic. In one recorded feed, a Russian conscript dropped his weapon, raised both hands, and begged through the drone's camera lens, pleading for his life. It was a stark symbol of despair. A modern battlefield where surrender could be broadcast in real time. But not all were given the chance. Some Russian squads fought with suicidal fury, firing at the sky until their last rounds were spent. One group of 30 soldiers, cornered in a ruined farmhouse, resisted for nearly 40 minutes before Ukrainian artillery leveled the building, leaving nothing but rubble. For those UAVs unable to deliver direct strikes, their role was equally decisive. They relayed exact coordinates of hiding spots to Ukrainian ground forces. Within minutes, squads of Ukrainian soldiers mounted on fast, all-terrain motorcycles sped into the combat zone. Armed with rifles and grenade launchers, they encircled the last Russian positions, forcing dozens to surrender. By noon, over 300 Russian soldiers had been captured alive, their weapons scattered in the dirt. The toll was staggering. Of the original 70 Russian tanks, fewer than 20 remained functional, most abandoned. More than 800 Russian troops were dead or wounded, with the survivors either captured or fleeing in chaos. Ukraine's losses were painful but comparatively light. 5 soldiers critically wounded from earlier drone strikes and fewer than 20 killed across the entire defense. As the battlefield fell silent, smoke columns marked the wreckage of Russia's ambition. What Moscow had envisioned as a decisive strike had been turned into a humiliating disaster. Under Syrsky's command, Ukraine had not only survived, but annihilated an entire assault brigade in a single morning, sending a message that would echo far beyond the front lines. By the time the smoke cleared over Donetsk on the morning of September 8, 2025, the outcome was undeniable. Russia had launched a massive assault. 320 drones, 70 tanks, 30 mine-clearing vehicles, and 1,200 elite soldiers. On paper, it was a perfect operation, carefully planned, heavily armed, and designed to crush Ukraine in a single strike. But what unfolded was the opposite. Ukraine, under the steady leadership of General Alexander Syrskyi, absorbed the blow, adapted in real time, and turned disaster into opportunity. A prematurely detonated minefield could have spelled defeat. Instead, Ukraine countered with innovation: 200 net-casting drones, 6-barrel Gatling guns, and swarms of kamikaze UAVs that dismantled Russia's offensive piece by piece. When the armored spearhead faltered, Ukrainian tanks emerged from the forests to deliver a decisive ambush. And when scattered Russian survivors tried to hide, drones and motorcycle-mounted infantry hunted them down with relentless precision. The lesson is clear. In modern warfare, numbers alone do not guarantee victory. Flexibility, creativity, and strong leadership can overturn even the most overwhelming odds. Technology is changing the battlefield faster than doctrine can keep up. But above all, this battle revealed something deeper: the will of a nation to resist, to adapt, and to survive against a far larger enemy. For Moscow, September 8th will be remembered as a day of humiliation. An entire assault brigade destroyed in hours, leaving behind burned-out armor, shattered morale, and a warning that brute force cannot break Ukraine's resolve. For Ukraine, it was proof that strategy and courage can outmatch firepower. If you value these in-depth stories and believe the world should not forget battles like this, please support our channel. Subscribe, share this video, and help us continue bringing you the untold truths of modern warfare.